is no death. It is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week, it's going to be pretty similar to the last few weeks because I kind of know what's going to happen already. Last week, I had very strong feelings about Emil when he came through to talk to me about physics and perhaps trying to explain in layman's terms the physics of what happens in other dimensions. This week, as a result of some things that were written to me by Esther and Linda and various other people who communicate with me regularly, I thought it would be really fascinating to think a little bit more about that strange place that exists between living and dying. And it's a fascinating story. Again, like a lot of these things, I wasn't too familiar with it. I'd obviously read about people who've had near-death experiences or NDEs. And I've certainly read stories of people who are passed on and have actually communicated with people over the period and told them exactly what it's like at the point of death, at the point that they pass over. I don't think I've ever had any communication with anyone or had much knowledge of what it must be like to actually, medically, I suppose, die and then be resuscitated somehow. I suppose this must happen in a hospital environment. And then suddenly find yourself alive again and then have all sorts of knowledge of things that you had seen, which perhaps you interpret as something very spiritual. In the course of getting ready for today's podcast, I felt it was very important since somebody had actually, Esther had actually written to me and mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, if you don't know, was a very well-respected, well-regarded psychiatrist who not only wrote a bunch of papers about grief and the process of dying and indeed the afterlife, she was also a tremendous record of she had a tremendous record of sitting with people who were dying, who had terminal illnesses, and she recorded their thoughts. And I think she even laid out a certain theory of the 5 phases that people go through from the point that they know that they're terminally ill to the point that they die. That's not, of course, of great interest to me today because I'm interested in people who are dead already. So I think it's a fascinating subject. There's plenty you can see on YouTube about it if you want to. And although the lady is indeed dead now, she left behind a tremendous legacy of material where she swears that in nearly every single account of people who have died and then come back to life again, they seem to say almost identical things about what they experienced. So I thought today I could start off by asking my spirit guide Titan if he would try to explain to me what near-death experiences are and why on earth this would happen. So that's where we are. And if anything else happens, it'll happen. So I will, due to the ever wonderful magic of podcasting, disappear for 5 minutes while I try to get hold of Titan. And for you, under the wonderful theory of time, dilation, and everything else that we've discussed before, it'll be milliseconds for you. Okay, so I'm back now, and yes, I feel most definitely Titan is with me. So, hello Titan, and maybe I could start off just by asking you quite directly, really, how are near-death experiences designed? What is their purpose? And perhaps you could tell me a little bit more about it. Okay, Titan is saying to me that at a point that somebody has an accident or at the point of death, it's no surprise to that person. It's no surprise to us, he's saying. We all, like many animals, will have a sense that our death is imminent. There's a precognition, a feeling that we have that death is soon going to come. That is because when we have chosen the life that we lead, and when we enter the body that we will live within, we are literally letting our consciousness come from our root consciousness. And that part of the consciousness that moves into the physical body in the womb, in the fetal state, has already a plan in mind for how death will occur, and to a greater extent, a timeline along the milestones that will lead eventually to what we call physical death. It's the most normal process between birth and death, and it's something that is part of the plan that we make for ourselves. So he says to me that it's very important that we understand that that plan for death has already arrived. He says he wants to speak a little bit more about death. Death is a process that is extremely normal, and he says that a lot of spiritual people will understand that it's this transition point between life and the next dimensions. But the people, he says, in the other dimensions, who make up the consciousness that comes into the human body, have been through many deaths, sometimes thousands of deaths before, and not just deaths in human form, deaths in other realities, in other species, in other dimensions. So death is a very familiar process to those who have already died. It's not a great surprise. It's an essential part of the human experience. So when a person chooses to die, it's something that is something we pick up, he says, as humans, as we get nearer to that point of death. And he says it's not just people who live to an old age or people who are dying, who know that they're terminally ill. It's also the people who have sudden accidents, or people who are killed in mass tragedies like floods or earthquakes or plane crashes, things that he says that we might consider to be random events. These things are not random events. These events happen for a reason. And many of the reasons don't seem always apparent at the time, but they are completely designed, and they reflect the consciousness of the person who is living. He says that some people choose to die a harmonious life. To die, he says, as the cliche is, in his sleep, or to die quietly of old age. Or some people do choose to die in very dramatic ways, where there's an awful lot of fuss made, and it can be through some mass tragedy or some terrible accident. All of that is planned for a particular reason. And he says there are many entities around him that spend a lot of time choosing how the death experience will happen in the next human form. Okay, can I ask then, why would anybody want to spend time choosing how they die? He says it's a very interesting question, but he says that the answer is less easy to give a straightforward answer to. But he says if you have to, again, and it's very hard for us to understand, you have to see what the purpose of things are, and how the whole experience of life and death is such an integral part of our development as we move through dimensions. The choice of your death, the manner of your death is something that he says there are whole communities of people who do sit and talk amongst each other and decide how things will be, because quite often a mass event or a mass killing, he says, or some terrible tragedy, such as a terrorist incident or some sort of natural disaster, such as an earthquake, will involve hundreds of people sometimes. But not only involve those hundreds of people, but they will have ripple effects on many thousands of people. And these thousands of people need to be involved as well in order that the understanding takes place as to the purpose of things and how the natural order of events unfolds. Okay. So, that's why people might choose. So, how does this relate to people who die effectively, but don't? And he says, this is a medical thing, far more than it is a spiritual thing. Obviously, there is a time and a place that people will die. There isn't a lot of purpose in people dying and coming back to life. But and it's not a very common thing, but it does happen, and the reasons for it are as follows. If you have some accident, and he says most of these experiences tend to happen as children or as adults, as a part of an accident where some terrible incident befalls the person, and they are presumed to be dead. And often, he said, you're right, as you mentioned in your introduction, this happens generally in a clinical environment. But it's not just that. He says this happens when you're sleeping, usually as well. And people quite often can obviously leave their bodies through astral projection. And sometimes choices can be made during that astral projection for you to not return to your body. And that is a choice that can be part of the dying experience and can account for sudden deaths and for people who 1 minute seem to be perfectly healthy, go to bed and never wake up. He said, again, that's not an extremely common thing, but that is a choice that people make. But he says in terms of people who have an accident and appear to be dead for all medical purposes, the actual passing on of the body in the normal way is somehow inhibited. But the process starts. But before the process can be complete, it's interrupted by the strength of the person's character and their tremendous attraction to life and to the people that they worry about leaving behind. He says we stop there because this happens also in normal death. Very often, and he wants to tell me a story. He says, very often, and he says there is a young man with him now who recently died in a motor car crash. Peter, his name is. And Peter is here, and Peter is going to tell us what happened to him. Okay, Peter, hello. Perhaps you could tell us what happened to you. Peter says that he's literally popping in just to add this because Titan has asked him to try to explain what happens at a normal accident. He said that he was in his car and his father was driving him to school, and they were going along a motorway. It seems like a motorway, but he said it was more of a 2 or 3 lane highway, and they went along this route every day. They knew this route extremely well, and they had absolutely no idea that anything bad was going to happen. But excuse me, finding it hard to breathe at that point. And he said what happened was they crashed into a pile-up in front of them, and the car exploded into flames, and the car was on fire and the smoke was everywhere and they couldn't breathe. They were very badly injured, he and his father, as were a lot of people. But he realized that when he was choking and he was unable to function, that he had literally almost have been ripped out of the top of the car. He said it was a strange feeling. It was like being grabbed by the scruff of the neck. And he could see that his father also at the same time, it was like somebody was yanking him out while he was still coughing. And he was still feeling that, the accident was really serious. He said he didn't feel pain. He just felt a tremendous sense of lifting, of rising, of being pulled upwards. And then he could look down. I can look down and he can see the car on fire and all the cars. And he remembers looking from down towards the up. And he's showing me how he looked to the horizon. And it looks like tens of cars on this road that had all smashed into each other and were all on fire. And but the wonderful thing was, in so many of them, there were people, there were sort of almost shimmering shapes that were coming out through the top, and they were all lifting up together. And he says, that's what happened to me. And suddenly it all went dark. And I remember waking up somewhere. I wasn't too sure. I felt very peaceful. Everything was at peace. I didn't have fear. And it was only then that some people started coming to me and explaining to me that I had actually died. And what I learned, of course, over the period of time that it took me to adjust between living and dying, was that there were whole groups of people who specialize in this transition, who specialize in helping people such as myself and those people connected to that accident understand what had happened. But it's more than that. At the point that you are out of your life, and you're in that other dimension, he says you immediately understand anyway. It all becomes, all the memories come back, all the thoughts come back, all the connections with all the people who were killed, all immediately are apparent to you, and you realize that this was the way it was supposed to be. He's saying to me he can only describe it in ways that we can understand it, as if, again, we were all watching a movie together and had somehow forgotten that movie. But then suddenly you see it again and you suddenly remember everything that had happened. Or he said it's like reading a book and having forgotten the book. And then somebody reads the book to you later and you say, I remember that. And he says, this is the way it is. Okay, thank you, Peter. So if I could go back to you, Titan, and so that would be a normal death process. So explain to me then the near-death experience. Titan is saying that if you imagine Peter's experience, he in his brief discussion he mentioned that obviously it came as a complete surprise. He lifted out of his physical body, and his astral body, if you like, was pulled upwards, almost to safety, but out and lifted out of the human existence, and crossed through the next dimensions to where eventually he is now. Now, near-death experience can happen if you're in a very bad accident, or you die of some sort of disease or something, or whatever, and you will go through almost exactly the same experience. And he said, I think you will find that most of the literature will say that people have that same feeling. They have a feeling that suddenly, at the point of the terrible accident or the point that they die, they don't feel tremendous pain. They just feel a tremendous sense of of love. And some people will report that they can start seeing their relatives who had perhaps passed, or they can see a light or a tunnel. He says the experience is different for most people, but in many ways similar. But that is really no different from what Peter was experiencing when he did die and did not come back to life. It's a process of transition from your physical consciousness to your consciousness moving back into your Gestalt consciousness, your group consciousness. And it's always been there. So it's just been on a trip into the human body, and now it's returning home. And of course, at the point that it's traveling in this process, it's becoming more familiar to you. You're remembering where you came from. You're remembering your big energy consciousness and all the people who are connected to you. And as you would see the relatives that you would see, or the family that you see, or maybe past parents, or dead children, or animals, or whatever it might be, are all part of your consciousness anyway. And as soon as you start seeing them, you recognize them, but maybe not necessarily being your parents or your relatives. But at the point of death, it's perhaps made a little bit more comfortable for you to actually identify the various beings that you're seeing, the various energy consciousnesses, the light consciousnesses, the sound consciousnesses, and all the various other spiritual entities. You're seeing them and you're identifying them because, yes, you probably have known them or met them before, maybe in previous lives, but you also will know them much better once you get back because you're all part of the same consciousness anyway. But the nature of not dying is that you're not ready for that. So you automatically start seeing things with a half human and a half extra-dimensional perspective. Okay, so you are recognizing that something is different, that you're not in your physical body, but equally you're not too sure exactly what you're seeing, and your mind in a way is filling in the blanks and replacing the dimensional material that you don't recognize too well with something that is very familiar to you, which may be, he says, around your spiritual belief. So you may feel that you're seeing heaven. Some people, he said, who are Christian will see maybe Jesus, or they might see saints or apostles. They may see heaven. They may see angels. And people who are Jewish or people who are Muslim, people who are Hindu, will see any number of things, again, also that will make them feel comfortable, that will help them rationalize what they are actually seeing. He says that is part of your consciousness's ability to create the reality, to create what you see, and people will generally create something that makes them feel comfortable. He said it would be rather unusual for somebody who was deeply atheist in life to create something that was extremely religious and heavenly in the transition between life and death. So for somebody who perhaps was a complete atheist in life, they may see something that is a lot more, if you want to say, clinical, or something a lot more rational than somebody who was extremely religious, who was expecting to see, he said, the pearly gates, to see religious figures, to see a church, to hear church music and angels and angelic choirs, he says. But, that is purely a comfort zone. It's something that makes your soul feel comfortable as it makes that transition from human to spiritual. But he's saying what we must remember, of course, we're talking about people who are not ready to go. Okay, so why would some people be in that situation that they make a choice to come back? He says that the choice was made And this is why I talked about it, he says, and that's why Peter came through. The choice was made when you would die. You have a certain amount of free will and you can manipulate things, and sometimes the signs will come to you and you can either pay attention to the signs or you can ignore the signs. And if you ignore the signs, then generally speaking, your life will end in the way that you had decided it would end. Some people decide to pay attention to those signs and maybe change some of the possible futures that are available to them, and will delay their death by days, weeks, or months, or years. But in the case of someone who has a near-death experience, they have usually not made the choice to die at that particular time. And because of other people's possible futures and the interaction, the way everything is interwoven, they can sometimes cause you to get involved in somebody else's conscious decision to end their life, and you can be sucked into that. So if you look at an accident like Peter went through, not everyone in that accident would have died, but the potential, the possibilities of more people dying than did die are huge. But in some cases, some people are not ready because that wasn't their time, and they are very strong in their minds and their grounding to earth and their desire to be human, that they fight. They fight the terrible illness that they've had or the terrible accident that they've had, and they try to remain in human form, even though the tremendously gravitational pull, he's saying, of moving into the next dimension is against them. But they will fight that, and then it'll be reported by them when they wake up that they have actually seen what they would see at the point of normal death, or perhaps to a certain extent when you astrally project in your sleep. And they will report what they have seen, which of course is what happens. So it's not surprising, he says, that many people have almost the same recollections of what happened at the point of their death. And he says at that point they will generally wake up, and they will either live a life which is rich and full, and in some ways the added experience of what they went through will affect them in tremendous ways, and may also be part of their life plan as well, and can shape the way that they see the world or how they wish to help people understand the world. And he's saying, you mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as a lady who actually did go through a near-death experience herself, and that changed her, I think, forever, and made her feel so fascinated with the dying experience that she ended up making it her life's work, and contributed hugely to people's understanding of life and the transition to death. Okay, so that explains then what a near-death experience is. It's a kind of Titan. So you're saying that it's almost a kind of accident, is it? It's like you didn't really intend to die, and therefore you come back to life. Titan is saying, yes, it's certainly a change of intent. It's not a direct intention to stay alive. It's a change of a direction, a choice that can be made. Not in every case was that choice made that you wished to die at that particular point. It was something that an outside influence had on you that made you part of that process, of somebody's collective reality. And you have rebelled against that, and you've decided in your own free will not to go through that process. And therefore you will come back. And he said, I can only describe it as this feeling that people have reported that they're not ready for death. Now, that'll happen in many, many instances. Many people have had times, he's saying, that they may have been in a very precarious situation. He said you might have been in a plane that was going down, or you might have been in a mountain and not being able to climb down, or you might have been underwater and unable to breathe, or any number of situations where your consciousness was aware that the probabilities had been set up that you could die at that particular point. But for any number of reasons, the choice of the human body and the mind and the consciousness was made that that was not your time. And you struggle through it and survive. The aircraft crashes maybe and you're not killed, or it doesn't crash and everyone is okay, or somebody rescues you from drowning. And any number of instances where you feel that this is the end of your life, where it could be, because the possibilities have been set in motion, and that road could have been traveled, but that road has not been traveled because the decisions have been changed very powerfully by you. You have created a very strong reality, a future reality, that you're not going to die in that situation, and you're going to fight to stay alive for as long as you physically can. And that is a very strong feeling, and that can actually bring you back from a death point and back into your physical body to carry on living to the end that you have chosen, rather than an end that was perhaps to a certain extent almost forced upon you. Titan is saying that he wants to mention something. He said that he had another young man who was there with him. Have you got a name for him? And he says, no, I haven't really got a name for him because he doesn't have any form of name now, nothing that I could explain to you. But he has an experience that he is sharing with me that I'll share with you. Okay. He said that he was, during the Second World War, he was a pilot, and he flew a particular type of aircraft, and that he would engage with the enemy, and he would shoot to kill the enemy in their aircraft. And at one point, he remembers very, very well, before a mission, that he was unable to fly because he was really very ill. He said that he had some terrible affliction. He says it's not terribly important what it was. Okay, he's actually telling me now. He said he got a rather bad disease from being with a young lady. Okay, all right. So he was apparently pretty ill, and he was taken off flying duties. And he says that he remembers so well that all his friends, they were all going out that night for a mission. And he remembers looking at, because he was left behind, and he was having a cup of coffee in the room that they all used to sit around in, waiting to be sent up. And there was a picture on the wall, like a team photo, of all the people in his unit. And he said that as people would die, people would make a mark above their heads, sometimes like a halo or a cross. And that was a kind of a strange sense of humor that he had, but it was something that now he realizes it was essential in a way to be able to try to understand the enormity of what they were doing as young 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And if they didn't come back or they were shot in action, they used to identify it. But he remembers so well that he saw 2 or 3 of these faces. They didn't have halos or crosses above them, but their faces were kind of blurry, and he couldn't see their faces so clearly. And he was really shocked as to what that meant. And he says he'll never forget that when the mission was ended and the plane started coming back to base, there were, in this particular case, there were 3 aeroplanes that were missing. And of all the pictures of the people, all the pictures that were blurred, all the faces that were blurred, ended up being exactly the people who had been killed, and in some cases were missing in action. And he said he never forgot that. Well, that's a very, very emotional story. Okay, Titan, that was a fascinating half hour. And is there anything else that you feel that you want to tell me or to tell my listeners about near-death experiences and the meaning of them and the purpose of them? he says that there is something he wishes to say, and this is a personal message, and he says, it's me, I know why, and he says it's coming through for some people that you're in contact with, but he understands fully why you wouldn't wish to mention their names, because of the circumstances that everyone who's involved understands that the personal contact has not happened. But he wishes to say something on behalf of this group of people, and that is the immediacy of death. As you get closer to death, certainly in the modern world, you tend to have periods of great illness. You have periods of medical or surgical interventions. And he said, as we have progressed as a species, the amount of time that people get to live longer than perhaps they were expecting to live increases. But as a result of that, it's something that he feels that is important to pass on to us, that we are very, very, very able to prolong a life no matter what the disease we have, or the thing that is afflicting us, if we wish to. And it's through the power of our mind. He says this is something that I think we've discussed before in terms of disease, that whether it's cancer or whatever disease that you're suffering from, there is a sense that you can fight that disease. And to some cases, some people have actually been able to reverse the course of a disease through the ability to manifest a positive possibility where you don't actually die from that disease. He wants to say that this is not something that happens to everyone, because obviously some people choose to die in a particular way, at a particular time, for a particular reason, not only because of the experience of death, but for what they will leave behind and the experience and the influence that it'll have, which is very, very important to everyone's spiritual education. But some people can feel that they're not ready and they don't wish to die. And even though medical science may say you should be dying, they end up living for way longer than is normally expected. And that is, again, because of the power of the mind over the matter, is the ability to prolong your life through a positive change in the way that you feel this disease will affect you. He says he just wants to mention that, and that, life isn't ended until it's ended. And there is no reason why, no matter how serious a diagnosis can be, and how potentially life-threatening it will be, life goes on as long as you fight for life and you want to try to keep going. And he says that people often have to make a choice, a very sad choice at one point, to let go. Sometimes a relative will help you let go. And he says we have discussed people who go to clinics in Switzerland in order to end their lives, which is a valid form of choice that is made by that person. So he said he just wants to end today by saying you all have choice in terms of disease as well. You have choice at the point that you wish to die. And in terms of near-death experiences, it's an amazing experience that not many people get the chance to have, where they actually see and remember why they're here and who they were and what their spiritual personality is and all the entities that are part of the consciousness that they inhabit when they pass on from being human. It's not something that is particularly supposed to be happening, but it happens, and people come back usually with an amazing worldview and an understanding of the context of the human experience. Okay, thank you, Titan. Again, a fascinating couple of minutes to hear all of that. And before we go, I have to confess that at the weekend I watched one of the films that was up for various Oscars, and it was the one starring Bradley Cooper as Leonard Bernstein. And because I'm greatly affected by music, I was really taken into another place by one of the closing scenes in the film, where there was a reenactment of Leonard Bernstein conducting an orchestra in Ely Cathedral in the United Kingdom to Mahler's Second Symphony. And I believe the particular movement is basically about what happens at the point of death. And I think it must have been Mahler's interpretation of pretty much what you see at a near-death experience. And probably if you intend to die at that point, what happens thereafter. But I thought, because it's such a beautiful piece of music, and in a way, as music does, it can probably say in a couple of minutes more than maybe Titan or even I could ever explain as well in hours of podcasting. So here is just the final excerpt, which to me almost sent me into another dimension.